When the ashen morning light slid across the slopes north of Nago, the air still carried the scorched smell left by the night's bombardment. Rubble had been pressed low into the ground, smoke-laden dust kept drifting down in the faint breeze, and the earth looked like an exposed seam of ore. Junichi Watanabe lay buried beneath a collapsed structure, his chest pinned by a broken beam, his ankle twisted at an unnatural angle when the debris came down. The first breath he drew upon waking was full of powdered stone, as if something granular had been forced into his lungs. His body convulsed as his chest tightened, as though attempting to tear itself free from the weight, only succeeding in driving the beam deeper into his ribs. At his ear, a scrap of torn metal vibrated in the wind, its edge giving off a thin metallic tremor. Farther away, the last echoes of spent firepower rolled back and forth in broken intervals. He could not tell where any of it was coming from, nor how close or far it might be. His vision still hovered somewhere between darkness and a blurred grey-white, and his consciousness flickered in the gaps between pain and suffocation. His fingers moved with extreme slowness through the layer of shattered stone, finding nothing but coarse gravel and damp soil. Every touch triggered a fresh wave of pain, leaving him unable to tell whether he was struggling or merely convulsing. When he tried to shift his shoulder, the sharp corners of concrete fragments scraped across his skin, producing a dull, drawn-out pain. In the place where his leg was pinned, the muscles spasmed in small, erratic jolts, as if forced to search for a foothold that did not exist. He had no idea how long he had been trapped. He only knew that the weight on his chest and the thinning air were forcing his body into a constant sequence of futile motions. These movements had no direction. They emerged again and again under the pressure of pain, as though every breath had to be earned by a piece of struggle. The wound at his ankle had already clotted over during the night, but as he tried to move even slightly, the old scab tore. Fresh blood seeped out and mixed with the soil, forming a heavy, wet warmth around the joint. His breathing grew more rapid. Each expansion of the chest drove the pinned ribs up into the beam again, as if receiving a second impact. He tried to push away the rubble to his side with his arms, but dehydration had already sapped his strength. The push never formed into real force. His forearms slid across the stone instead, scraping skin and drawing out a new line of pain. Just as he tried once more to lift his head, a different vibration moved through the ground. It did not resemble artillery, nor the wind, but something more regular, the rhythm of several people walking at once. His body reacted at once. His shoulders and back went rigid, his breathing turned shallow and fast, his arms strained to pull his upper body out from under the weight. The movements were broken but filled with urgency. A shaft of light suddenly pierced through a gap in the rubble near his face, cutting into the dust and making each particle appear motionless in the beam. The contrast between light and shadow was too sharp for his eyes. All he could see were blurred shapes moving closer. Someone pulled away a board of wood lying across his upper body, and outside air rushed in, full of the mixed smell of disinfectant and wet earth. His chest rose to meet it, then was forced back by the pain. His hand closed around a piece of broken stone, squeezing so hard the knuckles blanched. His eyes were half open in the dust, the light shattered into irregular outlines in his field of view. A moment later, a hand in a rubber glove came into view, reaching in to clear the rubble around his shoulder. The sound of the glove sliding against the stone was magnified in his ears, and his body jerked again in a sharp, involuntary twitch. When the American soldiers tried to lift his upper body free, his back arched without warning, as if searching for any way to avoid their touch. His injured foot recoiled in a surge of pain, making his entire body more uncontrolled. The soldiers quickly adjusted, getting their arms under his armpits and around his waist to raise him. The instant his body left the ground, he tightened violently again, as though trying to break away from every external force at once. His arms scrabbled along the edge of the stretcher, fingers clawing for purchase, but there was nothing solid to hold, only air and loose fragments of stone. Once the stretcher was ready, they laid him on the canvas. The contact with the fabric made his body seize again. His shoulder blades drew inward, narrowing his chest. When a medic approached from the foot of the bed, his bandaged ankle broke into another series of short, clear spasms, as though the muscles were pulling away from contact they could not escape. The spasms traveled from the ankle up into the thigh, spreading through his body in a few seconds like a faint, repeated pulse. As the medic reached for the bandages around the wound, Junichi's wrist slid a small distance toward the edge of the bed. His fingers clenched so hard his knuckles whitened slightly, but he still found nothing he could anchor himself to. A roll of paper tissues was set down on the small tray by the bed, its faint rolling sound soft and clean. At the sound, his eyelids fluttered, as if his body were trying to identify some new, unfamiliar object by hearing alone. The medic tore off a sheet. As he folded it, the sound of the fibers pulling apart was unusually clear inside the tent. Junichi's chest rose slightly at that sound, as if bracing for a blow. The moment the tissue touched his skin, the muscles in his abdomen contracted so violently that his upper body jerked up from the canvas. The bed frame gave a soft thump in response. The medic steadied his knee and tried again. This time, as the paper pressed against the wound, Junichi's arm thrust upward, his elbow bent, his hand clawing at empty air for a support that did not exist. The motion was quick and compact, forcing the medic to shift his grip in less than a second to keep him lying flat. The tissue stayed pressed to the wound, but the tightness in Junichi's abdomen did not subside. It spread upward through his chest to his collarbones, holding his whole upper body in a drawn, resisting line. When the cleaning began in earnest, another medic pressed a wet cloth near the injury. The cold of the damp fabric on his skin made his foot recoil, sharply enough that the metal at the end of the bed shivered with a soft rattle. He arched his back a few centimeters on that jolt of force, but the canvas and the medic's hands kept him from going further. His breathing was fast and broken, punctuated by brief pauses. After each pause came a harder, more desperate intake of air, as though there were never quite enough of it. The medic needed to lift the gauze around his ankle. He told Junichi to hold still, but his body could not answer such instructions. When the gauze was raised, Junichi suddenly twisted his entire leg outward, a movement that clearly hurt but was not consciously controlled. The gauze stretched tight and tore with a thin ripping sound. At the same time, his arms pushed toward the edge of the bed, as if trying to slide his body off it to escape contact. Two medics quickly pinned his shoulders and hips, not with crushing force but firmly enough to press him back onto the canvas. When sulfur ointment was squeezed from the tube, it came with a sticky tearing sound. Its smell was dry and medicinal. The moment that smell reached him, he froze for an instant, then his chest expanded sharply as if the odor had triggered some deep-seated alarm. As the medic's fingers, now smeared with ointment, approached the injury, Junichi jerked his upper body upright again. His back muscles scraped across the canvas with a faint rasp. This time he rose higher than before, as though trying to break free from a sensation he could not endure. His shoulders were pressed down again, and when his back hit the bed, his breathing turned shallow and ragged at once. As they began to rebandage the ankle, his reactions intensified. The moment the bandage wrapped around his ankle, he kicked out with the injured foot. The movement was imprecise, but surprisingly forceful, driving the medic's hand back half an inch. The end of the bed frame answered with a short tremor. Immediately afterward, he bent his leg again in pain, though the muscles of his calf continued to twitch in short bursts. As the medic readjusted the bandage, Junichi's arms kept searching for purchase on both sides of the bed, as though counter-pressure alone could cancel out every external touch. Throughout the entire procedure, he never spoke. He replaced speech with harder breathing and sustained tension in his muscles. Each breath in seemed to demand all his strength. Each breath out carried a restlessness he could not suppress. When the medic shifted his foot even slightly, Junichi suddenly lifted his head, nearly striking the crossbar of the bed frame with his forehead. The impact produced a muffled thud. The medic stepped back a half pace, and Junichi, deprived of that minimal support, fell back onto the canvas again, his shoulders shuddering as he hit. The process continued regardless. His wounds were wiped, bandaged, and his leg repositioned. Every action carried out along the lines of a set routine. His resistance only made the contrast sharper. While his body twisted and strained, the hands working over him maintained the same measured pace, shaping an orderly sequence over movements that kept trying to break it apart. Under repeated pressure and repositioning, his responses slowly took on an unstable rhythm. Every touch triggered a sharper convulsion. Every convulsion was met by steadier handling, and that steadiness only made him more urgent in looking for the next point of resistance. As the treatment neared its end, a supply corporal set a small cloth bag down by the metal frame at the end of the bed. The drawstring was opened, revealing several basic rations: a compressed biscuit, a salt tablet, a small water packet, and a single bar of Hershey's chocolate still in its wrapper. The corporal placed the chocolate on the blanket near Junichi's chest. The rustle of the wrapping was clear and crisp. It caught his attention instantly. His breathing stopped for a second. He raised his hand and touched the edge of the chocolate bar with a very slight motion, as if testing its temperature, or as if careful not to trigger anything. His fingertips slid along the edge of the foil, and the packaging crinkled softly, the sound sharp enough to tighten the muscles across his shoulders once more. He did not let go. Instead, he closed his fingers around the chocolate, as if anchoring his awareness to this unknown object. After the medics left, he continued to hold it. His fingers pressed slowly into the surface of the wrapping, as though driven by an uncontrollable need to confirm, again and again, that the object was still there. Every small compression drew out another faint crackle from the foil. Each time he heard that noise, the tension in his chest compressed inward another fraction. Outside, a gust of wind lifted the tent flap, and light fell across his palm. The metallic surface of the wrapper caught it and reflected a thin line of brightness. During this time, nothing in his body truly relaxed. Even with the medical staff gone, he remained locked in a strained, unstable posture. His bandaged ankle twitched in short bursts. His shoulders trembled slightly with each breath. The hand clutching the chocolate bar was the only part of him that showed a continuous, sustained strength. Every other part stayed on the verge of tightening again at any moment. Outside the tent came fresh footsteps, the sounds of objects being moved, the occasional shout. When he turned his head, the motion was awkward, as if every direction carried new uncertainty. His gaze flicked toward the outside now and then, but each time it returned quickly to the small piece of foil in his palm. He did not know what he was waiting for. He only knew that any touch, any sound, any new step in the routine would push his next act of resistance closer to the edge of what his body could endure. And in his palm, the chocolate bar began to feel heavier than anything else around him, denser, more demanding, and more dangerous. Outside, the light shifted from the flat white of afternoon toward deeper tones of orange and brown. Dust motes drifted in the slanting beams, making the camp seem quieter and more compact than before. They had left him on a cot near the tent's entrance. From there, his view was half open. He could see the wire fencing, temporary posts, transfer lines, and vague streamers of smoke. His body remained taut. Under the bandages, his ankle still gave off occasional short jumps, not as chaotic now as before, but starting to fall into a regular beat, like a rhythm rehearsing for a large emotion. The medical staff came to examine his wound a second time. The curtain pushed aside, blocking some of the light and shading the interior. His shoulders reacted immediately. The muscles drew inward, lifting his upper body slightly off the bed. His breathing sped up. For several seconds his chest rose and fell in quick cycles, as if his body were timing its next attempt to fight back. When the medic's gloved hand brushed the gauze, Junichi's foot gave a quick, clean jerk. This time it was not random. The motion swept along the edge of the bed frame, pressing against it, as though his body were gradually feeling out a single direction in which to move. The medic pressed along the side of his ankle to check for fresh bleeding. Junichi lifted his leg a few centimeters from the bed, but did not withdraw it immediately. For a moment, it hovered in the air. In that instant, his core muscles tightened unnaturally. His shoulders leaned forward, and his body took on the beginnings of a half-kneeling posture. The medic held his knee to keep him from sliding off. At the exact moment he was pinned, Junichi twisted his upper body toward the side of the bed. This movement was stronger and more focused than any he had made before. The bed frame gave a faint scrape in response. When the gauze was peeled back, his arms no longer flailed in every direction. They pushed forward, toward the tent opening. His eyes flicked outward for a moment, past the entrance of the camp to a stretch of wire fence. Under the setting sun, the wire cast several long, fine shadows, narrow silhouettes falling across the ground and crossing the faint lines of the dirt road. He stared at those shadows for several seconds. His breathing took on a more pronounced, regular rise and fall. As the medic restarted the cleaning, his body tightened again, but the pattern of resistance was different now. He was no longer merely flinching from pain. He was using it, gathering force from it inside his body. His shoulders rose higher this time, almost bringing him into a half-sitting posture. The medic had to push him back to the center of the bed to prevent a fall. When he landed on the canvas, his exhalation came out as a deep, heavy rush. his chest swelling as if storing pressure he had no way to discharge. All this time, his hand still held the chocolate bar with crushing force. The creases in the wrapping had lost their straight edges under repeated pressure. The foil lifted slightly at the corners, like seams tested over and over. Every time his body was forced back down, he clamped the bar even tighter. A faint indentation began to form along his fingers, as if he were gripping something much heavier than it was. Outside the fence, shouted commands rang out. The first group of prisoners was being transferred. As the line moved, the clink of metal fittings and the orderly cadence of boots combined into a low vibration. That rhythm seized his attention. His breathing fell into step with it. He was not looking at the column, but at the shadows on the ground, the elongated shapes cast by the fence and by the sentries, stretching from the dirt track all the way to the clearing in front of the tent. His breaths grew more focused, as if he had found a point that was both strange and compelling enough to guide his body. When the medic checked the bandage again, Junichi suddenly raised his arm. His elbow struck the rubber of the glove. The contact was light, but enough to make the medic pause to prevent accidental harm. In that brief pause, Junichi pushed his arm further forward, trying to pull himself into a sitting position. His other hand still held the chocolate bar, and though it did not assist the motion, his grip on it remained so tight that pale grooves stood out along the back of his hand. His body shifted slowly across the bed. These movements were no longer disorderly. Each attempt followed the same axis. Toward the tent's exit, the canvas beneath him showed a darkened crease where his body had dragged over it multiple times. Each shift forward was small, but the gap between him and the edge of the bed grew narrower with every attempt. By the third effort, he could already maintain a half-upright position for a short time, his torso tilted toward the opening, his weight threatening to slip off. The sun sank lower, the shadows on the ground grew longer, overlapping in almost motionless patterns. Junichi's gaze fixed on one of them in particular, a line that extended directly toward the patch of ground in front of the tent. He clenched the chocolate bar in his fist. His arm tensed along his side, the muscles in his shoulder forming a defined arc. As he drew breath, his chest expanded in sync with the movement, as if trying to create more room for the next intake of air. A sentry walked past outside, drawing a fresh shadow over the existing lines. When the overlapping shapes crossed his field of vision, Junichi's body shivered slightly, not with fear, but as if something had suddenly fallen into place. His grip on the chocolate bar changed. It shifted from a simple fist to something closer to the beginning of a striking posture. He did not raise his arm fully, but his wrist rotated, bringing the end of the bar into alignment with the open space beyond the door. When the medic returned to finish the procedure, Junichi's shoulders tightened immediately, as though to resist any further contact. As the medic bent to inspect the last turn of the bandage, Junichi used his abdominal muscles to lift his upper body several inches off the bed. This was the most controlled movement he had made so far, free of the chaotic jerks that had marked his earlier resistance. When the medic pressed him back again, he let his arm follow the push forward, planting his hand on the canvas in a way that shifted his center of gravity toward the tent opening for the first time. Once he was back on the bed, his chest rose and fell twice in quick succession, as if suppressing the motion he had almost completed. He gripped the chocolate bar again, running his fingertips along the pleats in the foil. The thin metal sank slightly under the pressure, giving off faint sounds. His breathing paused for a moment. In that brief stillness, his shoulders, back, and arms took on a coherent line. Leaning forward. Outside, the transfer columns had moved on. Only patrolling guards remained, the shadows still stretched across the dirt, quiet as if waiting. He watched that direction for a long time, each breath drawing more intent into his chest. In his hand, the chocolate bar bent slightly under the strain, as though bearing a load far beyond its meaning. He needed no touch, no command. His body was narrowing itself toward the only exit it could see. What had once been random convulsions had become a clear, fixed tendency. What had once been an indistinct unrest had been given a structure and a target. Two lines, unaware of each other, were moving toward the same point. The sky had not yet gone fully dark, but the remaining daylight was already sliced into thin, fragmented bars by the wire and tent supports, falling onto the ground in interlaced patterns of dull gold and grey earth. The camp noises had grown sparse. Only the occasional pacing of guards and the short rumble of engines repositioning vehicles broke the quiet. Junichi still held his torso slightly tilted forward, his shoulders drawn tight. His breathing remained uneven in depth. Each expansion of his chest looked like preparation for a larger movement yet to come. The fingers gripping the chocolate bar had gone pale at the knuckles. The foil, crushed repeatedly, bore small creases where the hard interior had been shifted and tested again and again beneath his palm. No one touched him now, but his body stayed in a state poised for sudden motion. The lower leg still spasmed with pain, and he forced it straight whenever he could. His shoulder blades sank and edged forward. His abdominal muscles stood out in taut ridges during each brief pause between breaths. A gust of wind lifted the front flap of the tent. Light ran along the opening and fell across his chest. In that instant, he leaned forward, raising his upper body completely off the bed, as if waiting for an order that did not come. A second later, lacking the strength to hold himself there, he wavered. Pain shot from his ankle as it tightened beneath the bandages, and his breathing broke. The pain did not stop him. It seemed instead to pull the rest of his body into a single hardened line, no longer scattered among separate reflexes. A guard passed outside. The light clink of metal on wire sounded as his equipment brushed against the fence. Junichi's head turned toward the sound. His shoulders followed, then his waist, bringing his body into an unstable half-kneeling posture on the bed. His hands pressed into the canvas, his palms slick with tension. Chocolate bar, trapped in his fist, tilted upward. For the first time, his arm held it in a clear, forward-raising angle. With another small effort, he shifted his weight off the cot entirely. His bandaged leg dropped heavily into the mud. The impact forced his knee to bend, dragging a fresh wave of pain through his ankle. But again, the pain did not halt him. He used the bend in his knee as a brace, pushing his body forward in an unsteady half-step. The guard had heard something at the entrance and turned to look. By then, Junichi was already moving. The injured leg could not carry him properly. His body lurched forward in a lopsided rush, one leg dragging through the mud, one shoulder driving ahead. It looked less like coordinated motion than a body being dragged along by something in its core. His right hand held the chocolate bar aloft. His wrist was rigid, and the whole arm traced an unstable but unswerving arc through the air. The mud under him tore into a shallow groove as he forced himself onward. At the next step, his ankle nearly buckled sideways, but he leveraged the momentum of his upper body to keep moving. Each breath sounded as if ripped open by force, his chest rising and dropping in harsh, broken pulses. As he neared the edge of the tent, the shadows lay across his face, freezing his movement for a heartbeat at the line between light and dark. The guard, now fully aware of his movement, stepped in to intercept. Still, Junichi kept driving forward, dragging his injured foot, slow but ferocious in his focus. His arm remained raised, the chocolate bar clenched like a sealed object. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, on the shadow that extended in a direct line from the tent to the fence. The guard's presence within that line seemed, in his field of view, to merge with it. He was now only 2 strides from the opening. The guard moved to block him. Junichi's body made one more irregular leap over the mud, burning the last of his strength in a final drive. His shoulder came forward in an attempt to break through, the chocolate bar in his hand held high in midair, his movement full of an irreversible charge. In the next moment, the guard's forearm cut horizontally across Junichi's chest. His other hand clamped down on Junichi's raised wrist. The action was clean and stable, devoid of excess force. When Junichi's body hit that barrier, all his momentum drove into his sternum and ribs against the guard's arm, drawing a heavy, dull thud. His wrist was locked. The chocolate bar bent sharply in his grip. The foil split, revealing a fractured block of chocolate within. There was no explosion, no reaction, none of the transformation his body seemed to have been straining toward. Mud crept into the tear in the wrapping, soaking into the chocolate, making it heavy and soft. For several seconds after being caught, his body still tried to fight free, but the struggle was shorter and more fragmented than before. Under the guard's hold, his shoulders heaved rapidly, once, twice, 3 times, then lost their rhythm. His ankle, overstrained in the effort, twisted again. Pain climbed up his leg and drove his knee into the ground. The guard eased him downward into the mud, while another soldier moved in to pin his shaking leg. Pinned to the earth, he felt the cool of the ground seep into his upper arm and flank. After a few more convulsions, his motions began to falter. His hand maintained a fist for a moment longer, even though the chocolate had slipped from the torn wrapper and was lying in the mud nearby, broken and shapeless. His knuckles, washed pale by the effort of clenching, slowly filled with color again as the tension drained. Farther off, the sounds of ordered movement resumed. A column of men marched somewhere beyond his sight, an order of things that no longer had anything to do with him. His breath scuffed the surface of the mud in short, uneven bursts. The rising and falling of his chest no longer belonged to any pattern of preparation, only to the crude demands of breathing itself. Fixed to the ground, he could no longer move forward at all, nor summon the strength to lift himself even by an inch. For the first time, he was completely still. No charge, no resistance, no destination, only breathing, earth, and the fading tremors of cooling muscles. The shadows still stretched across the ground, but now they had no part in his movements, and no remaining meaning in his field of vision. Chocolate slowly absorbed moisture, sagging as it softened, mixing into the soil until its shape and hardness, the qualities that had once provoked such dislocation, were gone. As night settled over the camp, the wind passed through the wire without carrying the dust it had held in daylight, leaving only the occasional light ring of metal. When Junichi was lifted from the mud and carried back into the tent, his body no longer responded with the sudden reflex movements of before. His shoulders remained tense, but did not erupt into the violent jerks that had accompanied every breath earlier in the day. His ankle was bleeding again from the effort. The bandage was stained a dark patch. The medics prepared to treat it, and found that he made no effort to block their hands, no twisting away, no resistance of any kind. They laid him back on the cot. The canvas dipped slightly under his weight. His hand still held the shape of a fist, but his palms were empty. As his body cooled, the stiffness in his knuckles gradually loosened. A portable lamp was placed at the bedside. Light fell across the slight trembling in his lower leg, outlining the dark rings of dried mud. He did not pull the leg away, nor did he try to move the medic's hand. When they touched his ankle, the muscles tightened briefly, then stayed where they were. The touch of tissue against his skin no longer drew the old bursts of violent reaction. Sometimes his breathing quickened, but the boundary between tension and release had begun to blur, taking on the character of ordinary fatigue rather than panic. When the scissors snipped through the old bandage, the scrape of metal on cloth made his chest rise and his shoulders lift, but he settled again quickly, as if his body had confirmed that no further threat followed. The wound was cleaned once more. The damp cloth still stung, but the pain no longer triggered an escape reflex that swept through his whole frame. It settled instead in the injured limb, marked only by localized tightness and the slight shifting of his breath. When the dry smell of sulfur ointment returned, he paused briefly and did not move. As the medic spread the ointment evenly, his abdominal muscles tightened for the first few seconds, then gradually eased, as if he were, for the first time, allowing his body to follow the procedure to its end. During the new bandaging, his fingers closed lightly around the edge of the bed. It was no longer a grip of resistance, but something closer to an effort to keep his balance. The medic wrapped the bandage around his ankle and secured it, then tested the tension. Junichi's legs stayed still throughout, save for small tremors that accompanied deeper breaths. Not far away, on a metal tray, lay the broken remnants of the chocolate. Mud had stained the exposed interior, turning its smooth pattern into mottled, dark patches. Part of the foil still held its form, but the edges had turned soft and collapsed, catching no coherent reflection under the lamp. After the medic stepped away, Junichi glanced in that direction, paused for a moment, then turned his eyes elsewhere. He made no move to approach it, nor to retrieve it. On the next bed, another prisoner was being issued rations, including chocolate. When the man peeled back the wrapper, the faint crackle of foil was almost identical to the sound Junichi had heard earlier. His shoulders tightened slightly at that instant, then dropped. When the other man took the first bite, the soft snap of breaking chocolate made Junichi's breathing catch. His gaze fixed on the other man's mouth, but a few seconds later, his chest settled again. His fingers moved briefly against the canvas, neither gripping nor pushing away, just a small, directionless motion. A few days later, he was transferred to a rear prisoner of war camp. The routine was the same: registration, inspection, allocation, medical checks, repeated day after day. Acts of resistance never came back. When medics examined his foot, he sometimes tensed but did not interfere. When his ankle ached during healing, he used slow, deep breaths to ease it, instead of answering with whole-body movement. The line of resistance had been pushed entirely back into the realm of physiology. At the same time, the misalignment of his perceptions began to loosen under the camp's steady rhythm. He saw other prisoners handling identical chocolate bars, sharing them, saving them, trading them, even using them to coax children closer. The first time he watched a child bite into one, the sound of the chocolate breaking made his body flinch, but in the next second, he simply closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his gaze was steady. When his foot had healed, he was placed on a re-education program. There was no forced language training there, only simple explanations and daily tasks. For the first time, he tried to listen and understand instructions instead of reacting with his body alone. His responses gradually became more orderly. He no longer moved before the explanation was finished. He began to delay action until after comprehension, and that change proved more significant than language itself. When repatriation began, his name appeared on a list to be sent home. He did not show the same urgency as many of the other prisoners. Standing in the farewell line in the camp, he held himself straight, posture steady, without the excessive tension that had once filled his frame. He carried a small bag of personal belongings. The documents inside were roughly made, and at the very bottom lay a clipped corner of chocolate foil. The mud stains had long since been washed away. All that remained was a single, irregular crease. Back in Japan, he found a landscape of ruins and hunger, with daily life far less structured than the routines of the prisoner camp. For the first time on home soil, he felt lost. His body had adapted to one kind of rhythm and could not find its match in the surroundings he had once known. Several months later, he applied for a labor program in the United States. After checks and approvals, he received permission to travel to the mainland. In the first years of resettlement, he worked in a construction materials warehouse. His duties were inventory, distribution, and handling. Tasks with clear procedures, fixed pacing, and repeated motions, similar in structure to the systems he had encountered in the camp. His body adjusted more quickly than that of many other immigrants. He never clashed with the routines. He kept that small, creased scrap of foil at the bottom of his storage box. It served no particular purpose. He never showed it to anyone and never spoke of it. It simply remained there, quietly, like a piece of the past that had been completely snapped, pressed flat, and cooled. No longer dangerous, without special meaning, but not gone. Like all the things in him that had once been drawn tight to the breaking point, now worn down and dismantled under the sustained wash of procedures, rearranged layer by layer until they lay silently at the deepest level of his life, no longer needing to be resisted and no longer needing to be proven.